We'll just go ahead and get started, huh? Just right off the bat. Hi, welcome to the Sid City Social Club adjacent special interest discussions. Today, talking about disability representation in Star Trek. Take it away.
Thank you all for coming. So first, my qualifications, I mean, you guys already know me, but I've been a Star Trek fan for over 30 years. I am old, sorry. I'm also physically disabled and neurodiverse. So that's where I'm coming from here. Obviously, disability is a very personal topic. So what I'm going to say is opinion, and not everyone is going to agree with me, and it's fine if you don't, and feel free to bring it up in questions and comments after too. And yeah, that's the disclaimers. So this is called Star Trek and Disability, the Good, the Bad, and the Ethics. So how I'm judging the characters as I get through them is on a few different points. Accessibility, accommodation, and impact is basically how they relate to the world around them and how the world relates back to them as far as their disability. If it's seamless, if they're integrated, if it matters if they're disabled, like how they fit into the setting. Tropes are, I mean, we know what tropes are. They're, you know, the patterns that appearances fall into. Some of them good, some of them harmful. The actors themselves, it's preferable if disabled actors play disabled characters. And that's going to have impact on the points too. And then finally, the overall message and theme of their appearance, the episode they're in, their character arc. And let's start with the high points. First of all, of course, we have Geordi LaForge, who is basically the face of disability in Star Trek. He's from the Next Generation, he's the chief engineer, he's blind. The visor is a visible sign that he's disabled, but it doesn't fully cure him. The visor causes him chronic headaches, which means that he's not fully able-bodied, which is important because when you're disabled in real life, there's nothing that fully makes you able-bodied. You're not, or neurotypical. So representing a disabled experience has to have some sort of accommodation made, some sort of room made that they then are allowed to fit into. Now, Geordi LaForge is played by an able-bodied actor. However, due to the fact that he's a Black actor, and even right now that's really relevant. The people that are being killed by cops aren't just Black, they're often Black disabled people. That's the majority of them. Geordi LaForge gets a pass. I'm cool with LeVar Burton being able-bodied, playing a disabled character. He gets all the points, he's cool. I realize I put Nog next, but Riva is actually who I'm gonna touch on next, because his episode is probably the best Star Trek episode dealing with disability. Riva is a deaf character, a diplomat, who is played by a deaf actor. He is in the Next Generation. He loses the chorus who speaks for him, which is his accommodation. And then therefore, when making a treaty between two warring groups, both of them have to learn sign language. They're forced to accommodate and make room for them and learn about him so that they can learn how to get along with each other. It's a very inclusive episode. It's very compassionate. While they do have the cheat of Data being able to learn sign language in minutes to communicate with him, it's still fine because he does do that. He makes the effort to figure out which sign language it is, and then he downloads the 6 most likely and runs through them and is there for Riva. So it's compassionate, it's accommodating, it never erases his disability, and he has a really great moment with Geordi too, where he realizes that they're both disabled and they have common ground there. The only detraction in the episode Lost, or not, sorry, that's not Lost. I'm forgetting the name. In Reva's episode, it has Whisper in the name, I'm sorry. The only detraction is that Dr. Pulaski does search for a cure for Reva after he loses his speaking chorus, and also mentions a tiny possibility of a cure for Geordi. And a cure is basically not what we're looking for in disability representation. So that takes away a little bit from the episode, but it does not take away from the character of Reva at all. And I think Reva is probably the best disability representation Star Trek has done. Now we go back up to Nog. Nog from Deep Space Nine, for most of the show, is able-bodied. He's doing great. But after the siege that he participates in, he loses a leg, and then he spends an episode, It's Only a Paper Moon, dealing with PTSD. They do not do a great job of dealing with the physical disability, but he loses the leg, it's replaced, that's dealt with. However, he does have the PTSD, which counts as disabling. And he goes through that slowly, he struggles through it. It's a very compassionate attention to detail take. This show focuses on it and lets him deal with it, and it shows people around him struggling to deal with it and struggling to come to terms with what's going on and struggling to understand, which is fairly typical of the disabled experience as well. Also, Aaron Eisenberg, Nog's actor, was chronically ill. So here we have, again, a disabled actor portraying a disabled character, which is a bonus. And now we have Discovery's really great entry. We might be blocked by the cameras, I hope not. Can you see the bottom right hand corner? Okay, good. So that ensign has no name. However, he is a disabled character played by a disabled actor, and he's in the background, which is actually kind of great. If you watch a show or a movie, you won't tend to see disabled people just existing in the background. And if you do, they're almost always an older white or white passing male with a cane. You won't tend to see anything else. So here we have someone zipping around the Discovery in a wheelchair, just being. And it's also worth noting that there is not a single Star Trek vessel that is actually accessible. So, because they all have their own issues. The Enterprise D is the most accessible setting, but still, even on the bridge, there is one station that you would have to stand at, and that's Tasha or Worf Station right behind the captain's chairs. The Discovery Bridge itself has 2 standing stations, and the captain's chair is on a step up. So that ensign, if he ever makes it to captain somehow, is not getting into that captain's chair. So that's one thing that Star Trek could improve on a little, maybe. Like, yeah. Next, the almost could have been our next. Melora, I've talked a lot about in the Discord and other places, so I'm not going to dwell too heavily on her. But the point, you can tell that her script was originally written by a disabled writer. She has a couple of very strong moments, a couple of very strong lines, which are then weakened by the reactions, which tell you that it was able-bodied writers who took over the script after. She tells Captain Sisko, for instance, that you can't know what it's like until you sit in the chair, which is very true. And it makes for a very awkward moment with the able-bodied characters standing around her. And then she laughs it off. She's also scolded for having to fight and advocate for herself quite so much. And as a disabled person, you're going to be fighting and advocating for yourself a lot. So this is a very true to life experience, and yet she apologizes for it. Another flaw is that she falls into a pretty typical trope of the undesirable disabled person. Until she accepts the cure, she's not a romantic interest. But the second she's open to being cured by Dr. Bashir, suddenly he's interested. Suddenly there's a blooming romance between them. It's as she takes a step to become able-bodied, she's desirable. That is an issue. She is also, unfortunately, played by an able-bodied person. So that is a point against. Iram in Discovery. I'm sorry to those of you who have not seen season 2 of Discovery yet. I am going to spoil her episode for you. So she's up in the top right, and she doesn't look human at all. And for most of her life on the show, we don't know that she's human. It's only in her very last episode when she dies that we find out that she was a human woman, that these are all changes to her body because she was in a horrific accident. She has to routinely delete memories to make space for new memories. She has significant challenges, but they are not explored until they need to make her a sympathetic character when they kill her off. And that is why she is not great representation. Like, we could have had that the whole time. We could have had elements of who she is and what's going on with her the whole time. And sorry, guys, this is trigger. We could have had that the whole time, and we did not. And that is a downside, unfortunately. Then we have Spock, who you may be slightly familiar with in Star Trek. He was a character in the original series, and he's come back in Discovery. And in Discovery, it was revealed that he has a learning disability. He has dyslexia. The problem with giving a legacy character a disability is that for 50-some years, he has been neurotypical and able-bodied. It's kind of like pasting in the representation, and there's no room for nuance and depth being applied backward. Now forward, as we see him in Strange New Worlds, it could be slightly different, and it may influence the character or it may not. But previously, all of his childhood difficulties were due to being half Vulcan, half human, which is very different from the disabled experience. So it's almost there, but it doesn't quite get there. And finally in this group is Deanna, who in the episode Lost, which I mentioned earlier in the wrong time, loses her empathic abilities. Because this is a natural ability of her people, she's half Betazoid, losing them becomes disabling. She was born with them, she was raised with them, she expected to have them. And initially the episode is rather good. It touches a little bit on the grief of becoming disabled, which not a whole lot of things do. And sorry, hang on, I have to retrieve the cat. Where was I? I'm so sorry. Okay, so it touches on grief which not a lot of things do. And Guinan even comes and is supportive. Most of the crew seems accepting. And then Will Riker, who is Deanna Troy's love interest, tears her down. And he's like, yeah, before, when you had that ability, you were kind of arrogant, you were aristocratic, you were a jerk. And Deanna Troi has just been disabled, and you supposedly love her, and you tear into her like that. That was why this becomes an almost could have been. Because also at the end, he's completely forgiven, it's fine, it's not held against him. She's like, oh, we're good. And it's teasing, it's treated like a joke at the end. If ever you call me aristocratic again, ha. So that kind of takes away from the episode. On the whole though, it was a lot better than a lot of other representation in general. Moving on to the bad group. So we have, first of all, bottom left is Miranda Jones from the original series. She comes on the Enterprise with a specific job to do. and she is fully qualified. But do you see that dress that she has on with all the little sparklies? Those are nodes that help her see because she's blind. She is hiding the fact that she's blind. And as soon as it's revealed that she's blind, as soon as Spock reveals that she's blind, in fact, she is suddenly treated as if she's not qualified for the job. And she is pushed out of the way so Spock can do it instead. This turns into a disastrous backfire. She has to come in and do the job anyway. But the fact that it's taken away from her just because she's disabled is not good. All of her qualifications, all of her training, all of her experience is disregarded simply because she is disabled. And that is not acceptable. At the top, we have an image of the 4 augments who appeared on Deep Space Nine. They are extreme stereotypes of various personality disorders. And the Federation does not make room for them. These people have these personality disorders because of choices their parents made. And so Starfleet, the Federation, locks them away. Even after they've proven that they can, with some help, be a part of society, that they can help out in society, that they can be productive and members of it, they're still taken back and locked up. And the implication is that there are a lot of people just like them who are still institutionalized and held in this place instead of being incorporated and being given these lives in the supposed utopia. We also have a problem with the far right woman who, in the first appearance, is mute and just doesn't talk because that's what's going on in her head. The second appearance, they come to Deep Space Nine so that, again, she can be cured, and so she can suddenly become a romantic interest. She can suddenly become a desirable person. Before she was disabled and undesirable, now, oh hey, she's fixed. We can love her, we can want her. Oh yeah, I should really quickly, I'm going to backtrack very briefly. On Riva and Geordi, they are both allowed to be sexual beings. Riva in particular hits on Deanna Troi directly, and she responds to it with warmth. Geordi is not successful in his attempts, but he is allowed to have romantic desires and go on dates and act like a normal person would, an able-bodied person. Whereas a lot of disabled characters just, there is no romance in their lives, there is no sex in their lives, they are treated like sexless beings. And that's the same here, even though the woman reclining in the image is hypersexualized, she is constantly turned down and it's treated as not acceptable. No one should be interested in her. And of course, Serena, the woman who's standing, gets to be romantic because she gets cured. I've just seen that I have a typo in my slide. The next character's name is actually Aurelio, not Aurelion. I apologize for that. And he is the bottom middle character. He was introduced in Discovery, and he is played by Kenneth Mitchell, a disabled actor. So that gets points. Unfortunately, in every other way, Aurelio is a really bad depiction of a disabled character. He has a speech about how he was saved by Assyria because he's worthy. And this is a common, hurtful, and harmful trope. The disabled people who get saved, who get positions, who succeed are the worthy ones, which then implies that everyone who struggles and who falls behind and who is actually left behind is unworthy, which is not true. But this is perpetuated in media rather heavily. Like, here, be inspired by this disabled person, but everyone else who isn't at that person's level, well, maybe they're not trying hard enough. We can see this especially in the discussion after Chadwick Boseman's death. Like, here is a man who had cancer. Look at all of what he did. How are you not even measuring up? Like, he did this with cancer. Why can't you? So it's a setup that is both offensive and harmful because it removes the responsibility of support from society and says that either you're a worthy disabled person and you're succeeding, or you're unworthy and you're failing. The other thing is Aurelio is infantilized, treated like an infant. He has been with Asira for well over 30 years, and she is evil as you can get. She is blatantly evil. She's not even sneaky evil like Ducat can be sometimes. She is outright evil. And somehow he has never noticed until she's harming people on Discovery and she's killing people on Discovery. It doesn't line up. He would have to be an infant, basically, to be that oblivious after having worked with her so closely for so long to not know that she was evil. But disabled people are treated like that. They're not expected to be all that competent and all that capable. If you're in a wheelchair and you're ordering food and you've got someone who's been helping you out, say you're even at like a McDonald's and if the cashier asks, do you want fries with that? They will often ask your helper. They're not asking you. They don't talk to you. They don't see you as a person. They don't expect you to really have that comprehension, despite the fact that you're there, you have the money in hand, and you're the one that put the order in. Aurelio is kind of a depiction of that. There's no expectation of personal responsibility there because he's disabled. So, whatever. He's a good guy now because now suddenly in seconds, he's seen the error of his ways. And he's very disappointing in that aspect because up until the moment that he started talking about being worthy, he was actually good. It seemed like he could just simply exist as a disabled genius scientist, and that would be great. But then they had to throw the tropes in. And finally, on this screen is Pike. The problem with Pike does not come from his original series appearances, though they were a little questionable. The problem is that in Discovery, Pike is shown the worst fate that's going to befall him, and that is being disabled. It is more terrifying than death. And in essence, he's shown that he will be disabled, which is worse than death if he continues down the path. And he chooses it, and he is applauded for being so brave. This is a very heavily used trope. And even you see this in real life too. People say, I couldn't survive what you've been through. I couldn't do what you do with your situation. The implication is that death is better than disability. And that is what his Discovery encounter with Tenevik, interestingly, also played by Kenneth Mitchell. But that's what his appearance says. And it is unfortunate, and it ties into the very worst of the worst, which you already know what's coming, ethics. In ethics, Worf is paralyzed and decides he should die. This is a very common and harmful trope in media. You see a disabled person, they just want to be dead. I've seen this defended as, well, it's just his Klingon culture. They're warriors, they're expected to be stronger and able-bodied and capable. And so it's his culture that's doing this. However, it is human writers who chose to disable Worf, who chose to use this trope through him. And I feel like that outweighs the argument of Klingon culture completely, especially considering that this trope has real-world implications. In Canada, just this year, they passed Bill C7, which legalizes euthanasia just for disabled people. And if it was put out side by side with greater social support for disabled people, then it would be okay. But unfortunately, a lot of disabled people have very little social support. They don't see a way forward. They feel like they're burdens on their family. They're told they're burdens on people around them. And so to not be a burden, they choose to die. And the Canadian government is encouraging this. And this episode is reinforcing this. This trope is actively harmful. And ethics is, like, there are some bad Star Trek episodes out there, but ethics is right down there at the way bottom of the heap for me, honestly, just because of how dangerous this message is. And then we have 2 more slides, the also-rans. We have Picard. You may know him. He was in The Next Generation. He's also got a series named after him now. And I apologize again. This is going to have spoilers for season 1 of Picard. Picard is diagnosed with a disease. It's not specifically mentioned in Picard, but the assumption is probably that it's Irumodic syndrome because they came up previously in Star Trek. At the end of Picard, he's dying. It has no effects on him during the show, and then he is promptly put into a handy-dandy available artificial body. So he could have been disabled, he could have had some effects there, but no, we're going to diagnose him and then skip over that, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, it could have been really interesting, especially considering Patrick Stewart is an older actor. So showing some wear and tear might have been a really creative, interesting thing to do, even though he is, the typical older white guy who has earned disability, who is allowed to be disabled. We also have Tuvok and Voyager. There was a 2-parter called The Year of Hell, in which Tuvok is temporarily blind. And they make really cool accommodations for him. They have a tactile interface for his console. Like, he actually can still run his console that's normally visually based while blind. Unfortunately, there's just nothing else to it. There's no depth, there's no reason to disabling him other than possibly because they wanted to put Neelix in a security uniform. Like, there's no meaning to it. It's just a secondary throwaway thing. It could have been something, but they didn't quite do anything with it. And finally, not disability rep, but often seen as it anyway. The ex-Borg are really important, but I think their story is more both a refugee story and an LGBTQ plus story. They do have implants, they do have, like, they're missing limbs, they're missing parts, but they're all replaced artificially equally. There's no accommodation that needs to be made. There's no change physically for them. Other than the visual aspect, they can merge back in. And that's kind of more like a refugee story. Like, they've been cast adrift, they're prejudiced against, they're treated poorly as if by racists or by, homophobes, but they're not dealing with physical challenges or mental challenges that really hold them back. And we have Kayla Detmer and Samantha Rutherford, who, Kayla is the woman on the left, and Samantha is the guy on the right, the animated guy from Lower Decks. I didn't put their series in here, sorry. Hugh is the center picture. He's from TNG and from Picard. He is ex-Borg. Kayla Detmer is from Discovery, and Samantha Rutherford is from Lower Decks. These guys, Kayla and Samantha, have implants. Why? We don't know. Is there anything else going on? No. They're just there. And even at the end of Lower Decks, spoilers again, Samantha's implant is ripped off and he's fine. So while these are often called disability representations, if it's just visual, if there's no accommodation made, if there's no impact on their life, I can't quite see them as disabled characters. So in summary, bodies will never stop acting up or failing. which is a point because Star Trek is the future. This is sci-fi. A lot of people think that maybe sci-fi shouldn't show disability because we'll have surpassed it by then. Unfortunately, entropy happens. Bodies are going to be bodies. There will always be disability. Society needs to accommodate and actively be inclusive. Erasing accommodation betrays both representation and reality. There is no excuse for perpetuating harmful disability tropes. Sticking an implant on a person and calling it a day doesn't do it. Outright represent. Don't play it maybe, like with Tilly and Rutherford. Now let me address that one a little bit more. Tilly has all the hallmarks of being neurodiverse, but they're not coming out and saying it. They're being coy. If they come out and say it, it will count. It'll be great representation. But otherwise, if you're going wink, wink, well, she could be, it's not there. It can be ignored by able-bodied people. It can be ignored by people who aren't familiar with the symptoms. I would love for them to come out and say, Tilly is this specifically, because it would be a step forward. And they already diagnosed Spock, a legacy character, with dyslexia. So they could do this with Tilly. They haven't yet, which is frustrating. There are disability consultants out there for books, for shows, for movies. There are people who are in Hollywood who are willing to talk about this and help you make your stuff right. And not even just in Hollywood, you can find them on Twitter and stuff. And it's important to use them because it does matter how we're seen on media. That is how most people see disabled people. You don't see a lot of them out in real life because society kind of doesn't accommodate, it doesn't include, it excludes. And then the last point, Star Trek does have way more disability representation than most shows out there that aren't medical. But it also has over 800 episodes. So kudos to them for what they have done. But it can and should do better. And that's my slides. That's my presentation. So do we have any questions?
Much like the Tilly situation, if Discovery sort of gets around to actually exploring the characters a little bit and they kind of go into Detmer's character, if they explore that a little more, do you think that that would affect how the implant is seen as disability or not?
Yeah, if there is actually a physical or mental challenge that she's dealing with, like I had hope at the start of season 3 because she seemed to be dealing with something going on, but it just turns out that it was a disorientation due to the time jump. But if she's struggling with something that can become disability rep. Right now, it's just a visual marker of nothing.
Rose says she can't talk at the moment, but she's glad you addressed Tilly because she was wondering what you thought of autistic/neurodiverse coded characters like Spock, Bashir, and Tilly. And she can see back in the 60s and 90s why they didn't understand autism enough to make those characters explicitly neurodiverse. But in 2020, there's just kind of no excuse.
Yeah, modern, there's no excuse. For legacy characters like Spock and Bashir and like, I don't think they're actually representative. Like you can read into them, but it's just the same as, like, I personally see Bashir as bisexual, but canon never goes and says, oh, he's bi. So he's not actually representation, even though I would love for him to count as representation. Here's my friend of Garrick pin, just to show my allegiance there. But yeah,
Hey,
it would be great. Oh, go ahead, please.
Hey, that was an awesome presentation. I just wanted to comment that, and I was saying it in the chat, I really wish they had done more with things like intellectual and learning and developmental disabilities. I feel like in real life, there are a lot of those people that are not treated with respect. And especially, I feel like in something like Star Trek where, oh, everything's intellectual and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I feel like that's a space that really, really, really needs to be worked on. And basically showing there's different ways to contribute to society other than doing what, you know, everyone else does. I guess that was my point, that yes, we need a lot more, like, obviously physical disability representation, but I also think the intellectual disability thing also needs to be represented. And you know all my feelings about Julian, and so he was like an almost thing, and you know how much that pains me, but
yeah, I thought about putting him in the almost could have been category, but we don't see him ever dealing with that. It's an in the past they cured it sort of deal, which is curing is a trope in itself. And maybe in the future, he deserves a place on one of the pages. Yeah, I wish they would have gone into more of how he felt about that instead of, it wasn't completely a capsule episode. It influenced the episodes to come after it, but Julian never goes into it after that episode. There's just a couple of jokes where Garrett calls him a computer or he calculates something really precisely. So it would have been neat if there was more of that.
Sophia had a question for you. I always related to 7 of 9 and her difficulty in social situation because Sophia is autistic, and she feels they did explore it in some sense, that sort of social situation awkwardness. And they were wondering if you felt the same way.
That's another thing where it can be subjective. Like, I always viewed her as a fish out of water, but I'm not autistic. So subjectively, she could absolutely feel like representation. But then again, we have the problem where they never said it. It was never explicit that, well, no, it was explicit that she was having difficulty relating to it. So it could be seen as a parallel. It could be legitimately seen as a parallel. Maybe not representation exactly, but something to relate to and to use an example when you're talking about autism with neurotypical people or people who don't have autism.
Clara, what would you like to?
Yeah, hi. Also, first of all, thank you so much for that. That was great. Like, I mean, it's very informative, and it's great to hear it from your perspective, most of all. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on the Doctor of Voyager? Because he's not like introduced as a disabled character, but he's a hologram, so he sort of first can't get out of his sick bay, and then he manages to, they get this emitter for him, or he's able to go on a date on the holodeck because he can be there in a way. So it's something that is inherent to him that has an impact on his life as a more and more sort of sentient being. And he's also essentially has this exchange with other holographic doctors on what he can do now, and he sort of teaches them or inspires them. So I thought that was an interesting character in that context, and I would love to hear your impression of him or your thoughts about that.
No, he's a good thing to raise. Like, a lot of people, wheelchairs are depicted as like awful things in media and art, but the truth of them is that they're really liberating. They let you go places where you couldn't have gone before, where you were held back from. I mean, not everywhere, obviously, because the world is not as accessible as it should be, but much like his mobile emitter, it gives disabled people freedom.
Yeah, it's like an accommodation in this moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it does open up the world to them the way the mobile emitter does for the Doctor. So I think he could also be kind of a parallel there. Like, he is unique in that his journey is more, it's like a more compact form of Data's journey. Like the Doctor, Data started sentient, the Doctor becomes sentient, but they both arrive at similar endpoints, realizing their individuality. And I wouldn't really relate that to disability, but they are very valuable character arcs. And the mobile emitter and his freedom to move around Voyager, though, that would be
it was more that I was interested in than the sort of journey to his identity and individuality, because that doesn't really play into that but the restriction that he has in the beginning and that is overcome. Yeah. Anyway,
He needs
thank
some mobility aid. Thank you for the question.
I agree with a lot of the parallels as another autistic person, but it's like, you know, it's cool to have characters like Spock or Data or so on to point to and say, I'm like this, but like, it would be nice to have someone where you don't have to compare yourself to a robot or a former Borg or whatever. Like you can just have someone who is the way you are officially. Like it's frustrating to have to always use metaphors because it feels like it sometimes just reinforces the way that people see you as inhuman because of your disability.
Yeah, so Torrin had a question about the Discovery Ensign, the background person in the wheelchair. They make it into 3 episodes in the background. They have not been in, they were not in season 3 because they had another job. And I'm not sure if they're wanted to be recurring in the future or not, but they were in more than 1 episode deliberately, which was a really great choice and is another reason why, yeah, he made it into my slide. Portia asks if I have any recommendations for stories that show or integrate characters into their world as a normal thing and not a very special episode. So I am not a big fan of this show, especially because it's another older white guy with a cane. But House centers around a disabled, painkiller addicted doctor named House who walks around with a cane. And the cane is never the question. It's his drugs that are the question and his arrogance that's the issue. As far as I know, I've only watched a few episodes of it. But from what I understand, he is treated as ordinary. Also, on the topic of older white men, there's Professor Xavier, who I almost cosplayed when I was in a wheelchair a couple of times. Because he's like in a wheelchair, it's just accepted that he's in a wheelchair. He gets a special one in a few series, but sometimes he's just in a regular manual wheelchair moving around. And he's never, he is a super powerful mutant, which, you know, kind of overshadows everything, but he's never treated as a disabled person. He is treated as himself and all of himself. Those are the ones that really come to me off the top of my head. There is another show that does have a disabled character running around who is actually a good subversion of tropes, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention it here because it's Star Wars, and this is Star Trek. But one other disabled trope that is very common is disability making someone evil. Like they become disabled and then they become evil because of that disability. However, Darth Maul was evil before he became disabled. And his evilness and his agenda against the person who disabled him are more revenge and to get his position back rather than to get his legs back or his entire bottom half back. I don't know how he survived, but he survived somehow. Like his disability is just simply incorporated. It's now, okay, he's disabled. There's still a magic, he's given special legs, but they're clearly not normal legs. They stand out as metallic legs, as artificial things. So he's still visually disabled, he's still dealing with that, but he's not evil because he got cut in half. He was evil beforehand. So, yeah, Sid did play, what's his face, Doran. From Dorn. Oh gosh. Yeah, I don't remember his name, but he was in a wheelchair. It was due to gout, I do believe. But he was still the ruler, he was still respected. It just happened that he was disabled. I'm trying to think of other things. I'm looking at my shelves to see my books. Oh, there is a book series called Otherland by Tad Williams. As a warning, these are very massive books. They're extremely large. And it's 4 books, but it's a really compelling series. And one of the main characters has a chronic illness that they're expecting to kill them. And they enter into a virtual world. They're hiding it for part of the time, but then they can't hide it any longer. And it plays into both their existence in the virtual world and the real world. And that was really well done.
Prince Doran was mentioned as well as a character from Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I feel obligated to mention Hiccup from the How to Train Your Dragon series.
Yeah.
I'm the mother of a 6-year-old who loves that series.
Is he disabled as well as the dragon? Because I just remember him hitting...
At the very end of the first movie, there's like a big battle or whatever, and Hiccup loses his leg below the one of his legs below the knee, and just has a prosthetic leg for the rest of the movie. There's like 2 more movies and a TV show.
I'm suddenly not sure I've ever seen the movie now. I might just know bits about it from Phantom Osmosis, basically. Amy asked if I preferred representation that is visual but not mentioned, or representation that discusses the issues of disability. I definitely prefer the latter. I think one day it would be nice. I think one day, like, Kayla Detmer level of representation will be fine eventually, but right now, a lot of people aren't exposed to disability in their normal lives. They don't know someone disabled. They don't hear things from people who are disabled. So it's important to actually see them be a part of things and have an idea of the challenges they face. I realized I did have, now the background ensign obviously doesn't have any discussion going on with it in the show itself. However, the big reason why he got super noticed was because a few fanboys started complaining about how unrealistic it was that someone in a wheelchair would be on a Federation starship. And so that's why he got really noticed, because he stood out so much in a way that they did not like. And so I feel like his representation inspired more discussion, and that's why I rank it so much higher than Kayla. Also, a wheelchair is an understood form of accommodation, whereas an implant over the eye is so common, but also says nothing. We don't know what's going on there. We don't know if there's something else going on. Like, we have no idea. To reiterate, I prefer the latter. I prefer representation that says something and discusses the disability going on, because so few people have exposure to disabled people in their real lives. And if that increases, if like society is more inclusive and we can get out more and do more things and be more involved and be more seen, then the Kayla Detmer and Samantha Rutherford levels of just an implant without anything behind it would be fine. But right now we need things that have discussion either in the episode or inspire discussion outside of it, like the wheelchair incident.
I was going to say with Detmer, I think that like her implant is due to some sort of injury or disability, because like at the beginning of Discovery she doesn't have it, and then
it's related somehow to the destruction of the Shenzhou. Like it's shown as a dramatic change after the destruction of it, but again, we don't know what happened. We don't get any sort of recovery. It's just an instant fix.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Really clear and well thought through, and I learned a lot, so thank you. I feel like I started back watching the original series, I think I was telling you, and I think growing up you think Star Trek is this utopian thing and they're representing everything, and it's just, it hasn't, they're trying sometimes, but it's really not there. I was just thinking one of the tropes, I don't know if you agree, might be the reset switch, that like 40 minutes in they go, oh, well, anyway, how do we wrap this up and have everything back to normal because it's syndicated television? Do you know, it's this, that nothing is ever sort of picked up again, and and someone goes, hey Worf, do you remember that time when? It's like, no, I think that's another trope that is damaging, is they sort of do these things, and I think I don't know what you think, maybe they're trying to do this, the Star Trek thing, to go, don't worry, things in the future will allow us to help. But what they're doing is sort of going, you know, and then they're not mentioning it again. And, you know, but, you know, so anyway, I wondered what you thought about the reset switch sort of concept, and is that something?
Yeah, without weight, a lot of the episodic disability things just fall flat. That's part of why Tuvok doesn't, despite having the accommodation with his console, doesn't really count for much because it's erased. The timeline is fixed. He is able-bodied again. Nothing was learned. Not even during the episode was anything learned. And yeah, it doesn't come back with Worf. Shoot, something came to mind while you were talking and I've already forgotten it.
Yeah, I do that to people. No, that's all right. No, I think the Year of Hell is like the ultimate reset switch in Star Trek history. But it was that I think someone was saying in the chat, yeah, Leah, there's no consequences, and it's and I think that's partly syndicated television back in the day, and now, you know, everything is expected to be 13 episodes, and it's sort of joined up. So maybe there's a bit more of a, you know, a chance for ongoing representation. But yeah, no, thank you. It was interesting to see your, you know, the charts of the good, bad, and then ethics. We said ethics. I was like, we can talk about ethics. It's like, oh, it's that episode, right?
Yeah, it's the episode named Ethics. Yeah.
No, nice one. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, now I just remembered there is a character because it was Call who asked. There is a character in sci-fi who is seamlessly integrated and allowed to be disabled, and he is Joker from Mass Effect.
He is Joker. Yeah.
He has brittle bone disease. He pilots the Normandy, which is the main ship in the whole game series, and he has a cane sometimes. He needs help from his robot girlfriend sometimes, and he's allowed to be disabled and still the best pilot in the fleet. So he's pretty awesome.
I think yeah, no, I can't believe I forgot that as well. You know, we talk about Mass Effect every week. Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think they do some stuff in the second game where he does save everything. I haven't got to the third one yet, but yeah, no, I think that is representation in video games. That's your next talk.
Yeah, it might only be Joker.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go.
The shortest ever. Oh yeah, Miles O'Brien did deal with PTSD after his imprisonment. That's a good point. You might need to meet a bit in the future.
I have one last question.
Okay.
As an observer, as a consumer of media and content, but otherwise not connected to how things are made, how can people take steps to make disability representation more of a thing in media we consume?
I mean, I did mention like disability consultants are available, but just write disabled characters and then have those consult with them. Hire writers who are disabled, directors who are disabled, because we have that insight. We know, like, again, disability is personal. Every single disabled person's experience is different, but we can bring a lens to it that an able-bodied person simply cannot.
So sort of the support disabled artists and content that isn't super tropey, like we learned today.
Yeah.
What some tropes to look out for. If nobody has any other questions or comments or cupcakes, then I think we're gonna wrap up today. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here and for doing this. This was fantastic.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for the questions. And yeah, thank you for being here, guys.
This was wonderful. And I'm gonna let everybody else have a good rest of your Saturday.
Oh, Trina's going back to say goodbye.